very rarely is the disagreement actually about you. As in, never about you. It might even be something that you're personally doing that she doesn't like. It's still not about you. It's about how she's processing you chewing with your mouth open, or using a phrase she doesn't like, or even getting home late is not about you. It's about how she feels because she thinks that you don't value the time with the family more than you do time at work. Kipp, what's up, brother? Obviously, I'm in a new background. I was looking at myself on this camera here. Lighting makes me look a whole lot better than I actually. This is more realistic about what I actually look like.
Yeah, this is when you're like, let's not publish this app to YouTube.
No YouTube on this
keep
one.
This one. Yeah,
it's like this is me without my makeup on, essentially. I've catfished you guys for all these years. You thought I looked one way, and sorry to disappoint. This is how I actually look. What's going on with you, man? Everything good?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I had a good weekend, which is a little bit of my headline, and so I'll kind of wait to share
awesome
how my weekend was. But why don't you go ahead and kick us off, sir?
Yeah, so I don't have a headline I guess it is a headline, but I, as I told you before we hit record, I am in the Nashville area today, so it's Monday the 9th. And I was invited to Matt Walsh. He's with Daily Wire, but Matt Walsh's premiere of his newest documentary, which is, I think, hitting theaters on Wednesday, maybe, or later this week. Anyways, he's got a premiere here. I was invited to a special showing, so I'm here doing that. And the reason I bring it up is because, I mean, what he does is funny and hilarious and trollery. He's a masterful troller. He's very sarcastic, but I also think that what he's doing is really, really important. With his documentary that he did, What is a Woman? I think was a great documentary. Yeah, it was tongue in cheek and it was funny and it was a little bit of mockery about that sort of ideology. But I also think it brings to light a lot of cultural issues that just aren't being discussed in a way that I typically align with and a lot of our listeners align with, because everybody's so afraid to touch these topics like transgenderism and, in this case, racism in America. So it's bound to be hilarious and like I said, masterful trollery. But also, I'm really glad that Daily Wire in particular, has the courage to put money behind these big projects and actually start getting some of these more conservative cultural ideologies out into mainstream, because up to this point, it's really been the liberal side of things. And I think dialogue is important, but when the conversation is only happening on one side, that's where the issue comes in. My biggest concern, though, is that I don't really want to get into sides necessarily, but it's hard for me to imagine that just having a differing opinion is going to be tolerated and acceptable by the party of tolerance and acceptance. That's where I get hung up. If it's tolerant, they'll be tolerant and accepting as long as it meets their narrative and fits their ideology. But the minute it starts to go outside of that window, dude, I've seen so much hostility and nastiness and vitriol towards me, even just in the commentary I give, let alone what some of these mainstream figures like Matt Walsh or Jordan Peterson. Anyways, again, I bring it up because I think it's a really good thing to bring in the other side of the discussion and start making it mainstream.
Yeah, totally. And the power of tribes, like we have to be mindful of that. I had a conversation over the weekend about how so locked in we get in regards to how our tribe sees something that almost all critical thinking goes out the window because we've outsourced it to the group. And this is part of the problem with politics making everything political, is because now if my political party says that, then now that's my tribe, and now I got to go along to get along, versus like, well, no, I disagree. And that's the problem with making everything about politics. It just really creates a lot of polarization because those are quote unquote major tribes that a great deal of individuals have associated with.
Yeah, I'm actually reading a really good book right now called Tribal. And the subtitle is How the Cultural Instincts That Divide Us Can Actually Help Bring Us Together. It's by Michael Morris. So he's coming on the podcast, but this is the kind of thing that you're talking about, is when we start to play these identity politics, or we meet, certain demographics, whether it's, gay or part of the transgender community or LGBTQ or a certain race or women in general. You start hitting those marks, and it's no longer really about the merit of people or the validity of their thoughts. It's whatever race they are. It's whatever sexual orientation they are. And that's the most important thing until things go south and things go wrong.
Yeah, totally. And so I try to fight, and we should all push back against even those things that are put on us. Like I'll even get a reach out of me donating to a political party. I'm like, oh, no, you misunderstand. I don't blanketly donate to a party.
Maybe a candidate.
Right? Yeah, maybe a candidate, but not to the whole party. Are you joking?
Yeah.
Well, that's crazy talk, right? So anyhow.
Yeah. No, that's really important. Too, the other thing I think is, the older I get, the realize that I'm not so black and white. And I am on a lot of things. Anybody who's listened to the podcast for any amount of time knows I take hardline stances. I have my opinions. I'm willing to have them challenged, but to get me to move one side or the other is pretty challenging, not only because, ego is involved, but also I think about these things. I spend time reading about them and studying them and talking with people. But one thing I do want to say is I'm going to actually do a better job in the coming months and moving into next year on bringing some different people onto the podcast that don't always see it the same way that you and I and other people do. Because I think it is important, if we're going to talk about these challenging subjects, then we should be challenged as well. So that should be interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, I like it. It. So my headline isn't much of a headline other than maybe a recap of my weekend. And so, as you know, I had a close friend pass away probably about a week ago, and he was kind of an older brother in my life, right? In fact, I don't even remember my life starting without him in it. That's how long he's been around my family, ever since I was probably about 5 years old. And so anyhow, so James Charles, great man, passed away 2 weeks ago, and he's native. He's a Native American, and his funeral was this past weekend, and it was awesome. And it was awesome because on Friday they did what they call a midnight sing, and you could Google this if you wanted, like bird singers, and so they sing all night on Friday. Then his services are on Saturday, and right after his funeral services, it's an all night sing until morning.
Wow.
And it's a process of ultimately dealing with his death, but there's some spiritualness to it about trying to encourage his spirit to move on, right? And it was just profound to be there and think, man, here we are going through this process all night long until 6 a.m. in the morning. It started around 4 p.m. in the afternoon on Saturday, and that was the whole process.
Wow.
Now, talk about being present with it. Talk about just being fully there and dealing with it. And I really and that was kind of my takeaway, and when I got up this morning, I read this quote, and so I want to bastardize it and change it. But the quote is, every situation in life is temporary. So when life is good, make sure you enjoy and receive it fully. And when life is not good, remember that it will not last forever and better days are on the way. And although I agree with it, I would almost say it slightly differently, in the sense of, when life is not good, be present with it, grow from it, and also remember that it won't last forever. But we sometimes don't deal with it. And not that there's even something to deal with. Sometimes it's just being present with it and letting it affect us and let us evolve and transform and grow from being present with the hardship. And that I had that wonderful opportunity all night long on Saturday, and it was a good reminder of sitting with things.
No, that's powerful, Kipp. As you were saying that,
Something came to mind from Rudyard Kipling's poem "If." I'm sure you're familiar with it. And a lot of people probably are. And I thought this was really poignant based on what you were saying. It says this: if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or be lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good, nor talk too wise. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there's some really powerful lessons in here. And specifically for me is realizing that, and there's a part in the poem specifically where he talks about not losing your head, when things are going wrong, but also not letting great things go to your head too.
Yeah.
And you talked about the bad times won't last. Well, I also think it's really important to know that the good times won't last either. And so in the case of your friend who was with us 2 weeks ago and who isn't now, I think it's really, really crucial that we remember we're mortals and we live a temporal life, and it's going to end the way that we know it today. We have differing views on what might happen in the future and what happens into eternity, but this is going to end. And we have, I'm at 43 years old. If I lived a life expectancy, I'm more than halfway through my life. Yeah. So there's some urgency that should be in that as well. And I think that's really important to understand.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. All right. Well, I was going to go on a tangent, but let's hop into it, man. We got questions from the Iron Council, as well as Facebook.
Actually, Kipp, hold on 1 second. I did want to share that one line. Sorry, I meant to say that. I did want to share that one line, but it's this. It says, if you could meet triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same. Yeah. That's a really, really powerful, meaning like, don't let the good stuff go to your head, and also don't let the bad stuff go to your head. Find that common ground that when it's bad, you can make it better. When it's good, you need to stay on top of your game because it could very easily go away.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Well, and talking about the Iron Council, this month we're talking about preparedness, and in our conversations last week, it was profound. This came up. It's like one of the best ways to get prepared is not to do all these things like get a bunch of food and get these other things, but like, where's your mind? Mm-hmm. Where's your physical well-being? Those are the most critical things to prepare you for hardship. And we have a tendency to go
hardship.
Yeah, totally. We have a tendency to go to the external and not address, the things internally that ultimately determine our ability to deal with hardship.
I think I know why that is, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, but immediately what comes to mind for me is it's way easier to buy a month's worth of food storage than it is to like search your heart and really figure out where your insecurities lie.
Yeah, totally.
Or to actually look and say, I'm really deficient, not in food supply, but I'm really deficient in my physical health because I'm 50 pounds more than I should weigh. It's way easier. And so we fool ourselves into projecting that we're actually moving the needle. And maybe to a degree we are when we physically prepare for things. But there's a lot of room left on the table that we're overlooking because it's not as convenient as just going and buying a new firearm or getting that food storage or putting a security blanket in your truck. All the easy stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Well, talking about the Iron Council, we have a handful of questions there, so we'll jump over to the IC. Joshua Cusius, what is an area in your life that you have intentions of changing but have not taken action? What unknown is preventing you from taking action? What are you going to do next that you have shed light on this barrier?
Yeah, that's a good question. I saw some of these questions come up. I have two that came to mind for me. Number one is in the business realm. A couple of years ago, as I was going through a lot of personal hardships, I stopped doing something in the business that was actually helping drive and produce a lot of results within our movement. And that was physically going to events and meetups and rubbing shoulders and shaking hands with not only, men who follow the movement, but also other influential people who had maybe their own movements or ancillary or complementary movements of their own. And that's part of the reason I'm here actually this week in Nashville, is because I see the importance of that. So that was a big thing that was lacking over the past couple of years. And I made that decision consciously just out of some personal decisions But I feel like I'm to the point now where it's time to ramp that up again. And I'm really excited about that. But I will say it's something that I actually have to fight really hard to do because naturally I'm fairly introverted. And most people who have a misunderstanding of introversion and extroversion might not know that, because what they think is that the extrovert is that boisterous, loud, animated, larger than life character. And he certainly can be. And then the introvert is this shy, docile, quiet, kind of weakly individual who hides out in the corner. And I don't really fit that mold necessarily. So people think, well, he must not be an introvert. But that's not actually what it is. Introversion is, the best way I heard it described is that everybody has an energy meter. And it's all the same. We all have the same energy meter. An extrovert's energy meter gets filled up very slowly. So it takes time to build up that momentum and that energy, which is why they can sustain it for longer. An introvert is somebody who that energy gets filled up a lot faster. And so there comes I've been to so many events where I went to the bathroom, not because I had to go to the bathroom, but because I'm like, I got to unplug for a minute. There's too much going on. There's too many people. And then I go take a break and a breather, and then I can come back and re-engage. So that's actually, when he asked this question, something that I've had to work on and be deliberate of not shelling up, not holding myself up, I had this nickname when I was in, I think it was 7th or 8th grade. And this is probably a pivotal moment for me in coming out of that shell a little bit, is I would never go spend time with friends. If they were doing something on Saturday night or they were having a sleepover or whatever it was, I would never go. And I started to pick up the name The Hermit because I would never go anywhere. Yeah, kids are cruel and it leads to results sometimes. But that's something I'm working on, is not only will it be good for the movement and what we're doing here, but it's also good for me to realize that about myself and then find appropriate ways to deal with it. Because, networking is a huge part, not just of the business, but life. And if you're not willing to put yourself out there, you're never going to meet interesting people. You're never going to do anything interesting, and you're not going to produce in your life the way you otherwise could.
Yeah, I see that. One area that I'd say that I need to improve on and take some action is really around the work-life balance of how much energy I have for home. Far too often I'm burning out at work, and by the time I come home, I have zero patience. I don't get as many things done around the house that I probably should. And my default, the reason why I do this is I chalk it up to someday. Well, today's the exception. Today is too busy, but tomorrow. And the reality of it is tomorrow's just as bad as today was and the day before.
Or worse.
And it never gets any easier. And so for me, I need to balance that better, balance my energy and get home and get things in order and feel content and satisfied with how I'm showing up there. And far too often they're getting the short end of the stick.
So can I call you out a little bit on that?
Yeah, for sure.
So some language that it just kind of, crawls under your skin a little bit that bothers me is this phrase, I need to, or I should, or I would like to. And so, I know you will just because I know your character and who you are, but I've also heard so many men say that, and they're actually tricking their brains. Yeah. So they'll say I need to read more books. And then they get a little hit of dopamine or whatever that chemical that gets them excited is. And their brain starts to process it as if they did it. There's a study I saw one time where you get the same chemical release in your body and the same high of completing an objective as you do in talking about it with others and completing the objective. So for example, let's say you have a desire to run a marathon. You start posting all that stuff on social media, everybody's going to you're awesome, you're amazing, you're wonderful.
You're so inspiring.
Yeah. And you get that chemical release and you're like, dang, that feels good. That's the same feeling that you get when you actually do it. So it keeps you from actually doing the thing that everybody's telling you you're so inspirational about. So I do personally try to stay away from, try to is another one. Actually, I just said it.
Yeah.
Try to stay away from, I need to, I should, I'd like to,
versus
what
I
is the
will.
actual plan? And that's my question for you is when you say I would like to or I need to do that, how are you going to do that specifically?
Yeah. So for me, the first is schedule. So it's not uncommon that I will, hey, honey, I'm not coming home tonight until 7:30, 8. I need to stop it. It's like my workday's over when my workday's over, and I'm consistent with what time I'm showing up at home. That's the first one. The one item that I'm already doing this quarter, my battle plan is staying off my phone when I'm at home as a distraction so I can be present with my family. And that's about it. I actually think if I just get home earlier and stop pulling late nights at the office, that's kind of the first step in the process.
Isn't that fun? I mean, I completely agree with you, but isn't that funny that you could do one or two things and they'll make a tremendous impact and difference? I think this is Gary Keller's premise of his book, The One Thing. And the whole premise is, and I'm paraphrasing here, but what is the one thing that if you did really well would make everything else irrelevant or less important? And so for you, it's getting home at the time you say you're going to get home and putting down the electronics. Those two things will get you 98% of the way there. Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy. And that's the
It's
case
like the
for
Pareto
most
principle
of us.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So everybody's trying to figure out like, oh, what's the hack? What's the gimmick? Let me just do this one little trick. Or like when it comes to technology, it's like, let me get this app on my phone that tracks the time and then it shuts it down or it limits apps. I'm like, how about you just have some discipline and make a decision and put your phone on your freaking nightstand and just exercise some willpower and don't go get it. But we're hacking our way to zero results.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we're just switching the dependency onto something else. So now I got this app
point.
that will tell me what to do. It's like,
which ironically enough will create more work for you, which actually exacerbates the problem of work-life balance.
yeah.
Because now you're doing the app instead of doing the puzzle with your kids.
Yeah, totally. All right. Marcus Segura, when experiencing conflict in your romantic relationship, what are 3 important things to consider or answer of yourself so you can meet your significant other where they are in the conflict, work through the conflict to help with a productive outcome and ensure you are not bringing your own issues into the conflict and worsening it more than necessary?
So disclaimer, a lot of people, when I start giving relationship advice, they're like, well, what do you, whatever. And yes, I did go through a divorce a couple of years ago, but I can still tell you what I did that worked well. And I can also tell you what I did that did not work well at all. And I can tell you what I'm doing now that seems to be working.
Yeah.
So, there's a couple of things that immediately come to mind. Number one, I'm learning this. Very rarely is the disagreement actually about you. As in, never about you. It might even be something that you're personally doing that she doesn't like. It's still not about you. It's about how she's processing you chewing with your mouth open or using a phrase she doesn't like or whatever. Even getting home late is not about you. It's about how she feels because she thinks that you don't value the time with the family more than you do time at work. So it's never personal. And if I remember that, that's actually really helpful not to get me heated. Another thing that's been really helpful is acknowledging that my role as a man in the relationship is to create a mental and emotional, secure, safe environment for her. And if I'm lashing out, if I'm using harsh language, and I've done all of these things, so please don't tell me I don't understand. I've done all these things. But if I use harsh language, lash out, act impatient, irrational, erratic, that is not providing a mental and emotionally stable place for her to express herself. Even when it's hard to hear, if you can be level-headed, as Rudyard Kipling talks about, you're going to create an environment where she feels comfortable having conversations with you. One of the biggest things that I struggled with during the late stages of my marriage and into divorce was that I was so frustrated that I felt like I was blindsided, that she didn't talk to me or communicate with me. And, we all have our things to work on. I'll own my part and she can own hers, but that's up to her, not me. But I also acknowledge that there was times where I didn't create the environment that she felt safe enough to actually give me feedback.
Yeah.
And if I would have done that differently, maybe the result would have been different, maybe not, but it's certainly something that I could have done better. And then the third thing is just ask questions to try to figure out some understanding without jumping into resolution. So if my girlfriend comes to me with a problem that she's having, whether it's personal or professional, I don't need to solve it. She's smart. She's fully capable. She probably doesn't even need me to solve it. She just needs to vent and get it out of her system or express frustration. And if I'm the safe place, isn't that a cool thing? That she feels comfortable enough to come to you to talk about it. And so I've tried to really use language that is not solving problems or invalidating how she might feel about it. It's just, I'm your sounding board. Tell me what you need to tell me. I'll ask questions that are relevant. I'm not going to grill you or make you feel like I'm talking down to you or leading you even, because I don't want to lead you anywhere. I'm just asking questions about what you're experiencing. And those three tactics have made a world of difference over the past couple of years. And in my marriage, when I was employing those tactics, it was significantly better than when I wasn't.
Yeah. Marcus says something towards the end of his question. He says, to ensure you're not bringing your own issues into the conflict and worsening it. And I agree with everything that you said, Ryan, but I want to call this out. You are going to bring your own issues. Absolutely. So don't think that you're going to be able to not. So then how do you deal with that? And it goes back to what you said, is being aware that most conflict and frustration is in the interpretation of something else. And so that's how you don't bring your issues, is realizing that you're upset probably, or the conflict that you feel in the relationship is in your interpretation of what she's doing, or it's the interpretation that you're quote unquote have a conflict or something else, and be mindful of it and address it as part of the conflict and realize that she's probably doing the same thing.
You know what's fun? Let's take a couple silly examples that came to mind as you were saying that, because it's going to illustrate, if it makes sense when it's a silly example, it'll make sense in the big examples.
Yeah.
So I dated someone at one point that she did not like if I had a Diet Coke. Every once in a while, I like to have a Diet Coke.
She just got triggered by it?
She hated it. She didn't like the smell of it. Or if I gave her a kiss and she could smell it, she hated it. But it's because an ex of hers, who she despises and hates, always had Diet Coke, and it was around all the time, and she associated Diet Coke with this guy being a jerk.
Yeah.
So there's that. Another silly example is, have you ever not liked a person because they have the same name as a kid in high school or when you were a kid who you really despised? Of course. We all immediately, if I had a guy who, in elementary school and his name was Kipp and he bullied me when I was a kid, the minute I met you, I would think less of you just because your name is Kipp.
Yeah, that's funny.
So those are silly examples, I know, but if you don't think that you're bringing your own personal baggage into every dynamic of every relationship, you're in left field. You definitely are.
Yeah. Well, and one way that you clarify is if you're upset, period. If you're emotionally charged, most of that's never in the space of logic. I'm so angry because logically we may not be making the right decision. No, you're charged because they don't agree with you, and you take it as they think you're less than, or they don't trust you, or something else. If you're upset in any way, it's more likely in your interpretation of what it means about you. Period.
That's actually a really good litmus test, because I can't even remember what it was, but a couple of days ago, I really don't remember what it was, but a couple of days ago, I vividly remember feeling the temperature of the blood running through my body rising.
Yeah.
And I had to get control of it. Just relax. What are you upset about? And I can't remember what it is now, so I hope I managed it correctly, but Yeah, you know when you're getting heated and bothered, and use that as a signal that maybe I'm taking this personally, and Marcus, maybe you're bringing your own baggage and bullshit into something that she actually needs to have a conversation with you about.
Yeah, and we can use this same line of thinking to benefit the circumstance. So she's riled up. Got it. So what might she be interpreting? That I don't value her, that I don't appreciate her, that she's not a priority in my life. Okay, maybe I need to make sure that she understands that. So that way we can then deal with the logical stuff.
Well, and I would say don't even try to make sure she understands it, because you're going to get yourself into trouble. What you're going to start doing is you're going to start manipulating her.
Yeah.
You're going to use a different tone of voice. You're going to say different things. You're going to try to figure out what she wants you to say, and you're going to try to say that because you're trying to get her to blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Again, just go back to let me understand. And so if you think, oh, she's probably thinking I think less of her, then I would say that.
Yeah.
Hey, like when I do this, how does that make you feel? Because I'm not sure I understand why that's a problem. But does it make you feel a certain way? And now you're eliciting, you're not trying to fix anything, or you're not trying to manipulate her. You're actually just trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is perfect. And then you can have the more in-depth conversation of her saying, that does offend me. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can say, oh my gosh, and here's what I wouldn't do is, well, it doesn't mean that. So just deal with it. Because that's how most guys won't say that, but that's what most guys will do. They'll say, well, it doesn't mean that, babe. So I don't know what the problem is. They'll say something like that.
You shouldn't think that. Yeah.
Yeah. Or that's silly. Like, no, just say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. What would be better for me to handle this situation so you don't feel like that, and you can actually feel the way I actually truly do feel about you. Yeah. And let her solve the problem. You don't need to solve it. She will tell you.
Yeah, totally. All right, Joshua Collins. We are talking about preparedness this month in the Iron Council. Conveniently, I just did the class range time and paperwork submission for my CPL. I've had one in different states in the past, and I'm happy to finally get mine in Michigan. How does preparing for safety for yourself and your family show up in your own preparedness?
But not as it relates to getting his firearms permit. He's just asking. That's something he's doing. But he's asking what we're doing.
I think so.
Got it. Yeah. Well, we had a really good call on this in the Iron Council on Friday. And some of the recommendations were solid. One was family meetings every week, where there's a family meeting and you're weaving some of these conversations into it. We also talked about making sure that you're teaching your kids and your wife, if it applies, certain skills that they might not already have. For example, if you're going to go change the oil in your truck, it would probably be a good idea to have one of your kids come participate. And of course, if it's the son, he's going to get his butt chewed out for holding the flashlight wrong and getting you the wrong tool. And that's just part of life. It is what it is. But yeah, teaching them basic maintenance on vehicles, basic project repairs around the house. Maybe the toilet isn't working and the handle needs to be replaced. Take your son or daughter to the hardware store, get the thing, and spend 20 minutes fixing the toilet, or showing them where the breaker box is, or maybe it's having them one night a week, instead of you cooking all the meals, you and your wife, or you or your wife, say, all right, kids, like, you're in charge of dinner tonight. And so we'll help you. We'll come up with a meal plan, and we'll be in there with you, guiding you and overseeing everything. But you're the one who's cooking tonight. Man, the more you can get them involved in these types of things, get them independent. If you get hurt, but your 13-year-old knows how to call the police and knows how to shoot a gun and knows basic medical training, that 13-year-old son or daughter could potentially save somebody's life. And there's countless examples of that happening. Yeah. So I really like those two suggestions. The suggestions of get your kids involved in everything in your wife, like never do anything alone that you could do with everybody else. Yes, I know it's going to cost you twice as much and take twice as long, but it pays dividends because it's an investment in them. Yeah. And then doing that family planning meeting where you're talking about, I think it was you actually who said, if you're away from your family so much, like most of us are during the day, that if there's an emergency, the likelihood of you being able to get a hold of them on the phone is greatly diminished. So do you have a meeting point? like Asia knows this is where we meet in case of emergency. Man, many people haven't talked about that. Another one that I thought about recently, because I heard this, is that you should have a secret word with your children because of AI technology. So what'll happen is I'll be at work and I'll get a phone call from my kid in their voice, in their mannerisms. It would be almost nearly impossible. It's only getting worse to distinguish whether that really is my child asking for money or something that's compromising. But if you have a word that only you two know, that's a layer of security to know, okay, this is actually not what I'm dealing with here.
Yeah.
So
this is crazy.
There's a lot. It's crazy. And it's going to get way worse. But there's a few things that I've heard, and those were all in the Iron Council meeting on Friday.
Yeah. Well, and on that note, for those guys listening, Iron Council, we're opening that up roughly in probably about 5 days or so. So if you're interested in banding with us in the Iron Council, you can go to orderofman.com/Iron Council to sign up.
And what's cool about this is we've got a monthly topic, but we also have a lot of LEOs in there, a lot of first responders. Frank Foreman immediate comes to mind. Spent a lot of time in fire service and specifically in emergency and disaster planning for large cities and municipalities in Southern California. So he's got all of these resources and checklists and ideas and training. So whether we're talking about emergency preparedness or finances or fitness, man, it's cool to be able to have experts that come in and you're not just listening to it on a podcast, like you're actually interacting with them and working with them to improve your situation. It's really, really powerful.
And that tribe is so strong. There's so many guys more than willing to help each other out. And so like on our Friday call, immediately afterwards, someone's like, hey, Kipp, I would love to talk more with you around fire starting. I'm like, absolutely, let's do it. And everybody's that way, more than willing to help each other out.
Yeah. I mean, we had a guy the other day, won't use any names or anything like this, but he's having some relationship problems. And I know that, I know him fairly well, and I know he's having some struggles. And so, but I heard something a little different in his voice on one of our meetings. And so, I called him up. I'm like, hey man, what's going on? And I don't know, we talked for maybe 25, 30 minutes. It wasn't long. Kind of worked me through what he was going through. I didn't have any answers for him. I just, listened to him, maybe gave him a few ideas here or there. And that was about it. But to be able to have somebody that not only you can call, but will acknowledge and hear something in your voice, and then they actually call you, that is few and far between for men. Men just do not have that in their lives, and they need it badly.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Doug Bezote, what do you see as the key indicators when making a decision to move on from a job or people in your life?
For me, I would really look for toxicity because I don't know that you can solve toxicity in other people. I think if it's neutral, like, hey, I'm not happy here, I'm not satisfied, I feel like I'm meant for something more. I think there's a real obligation and responsibility for you to really pour into figuring out what you could do better.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about this, Kipp, right?
Yeah.
But now we're talking about leaving. So now you're like, I'm done. I'm leaving.
Yeah. It's not good
for me. And that's
for me.
toxic stuff.
Yeah.
If you're in a dangerous situation in a relationship, an abusive situation in a relationship, maybe your morals or even legal things are being compromised at your place of employment. These are toxic things that you're not going to solve by just working harder or smarter and being more engaged or coming in earlier. It's just not going to happen. When it comes to work outside of the toxicity, I would start looking for things if I've done all that I feel like I can do. And that's a really hard thing to determine, especially in the moment. It's easy to fool ourselves into believing I did everything.
Yeah.
But know this has helped me, is that at some point in your life, there will be a reckoning. There will be a reckoning. There will be an account of everything you did and everything that you didn't do. And whether that's here or whether that's in the afterlife, I want to be able to hold my head up high and say, I did everything I could do, and it wasn't enough. And even though that doesn't help make things easier, it makes it more manageable, and you still feel like a man because you did what a man should do.
Yeah. Well, and that's the path of growth. Because far too often people will, to your point, excuse it, lie to themselves. Oh yeah, I'm done with everything. And then they'll move on, and their moving on is sometimes a form of an easy button. When in reality, there was opportunity for them to learn and grow, and they robbed themselves of it by not making sure that they're doing everything within their control.
It's also another important factor of this is it's never a waste to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes people actually believe that. Like they think, oh man, I'm going to invest more time and more energy into this, and I really want to make it work, whether it's a personal relationship or a business endeavor. And I don't know if it's going to work, but you know what? I'm going to try. I owe it to this person, or I owe it to this organization. I owe it to my clients, and I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to really try. And let's just say it doesn't work out because some things are beyond our control. Yeah. Was it a waste that you tried harder? No, because you learned, right? And now you can take whatever you learned and however you applied yourself into your next relationship or your next business or your next venture or whatever it is that you're onto next.
Yeah. All right, we're going to hop over to Facebook, facebook.com/group/orderman. TJ Bell, how does a guy who was raised by women and never knew his father or never had a father figure learn how to be a man?
I like this question. It's a question a lot of men ask and a lot of men are experiencing. I felt this way in my life. Here's the best thing about this. If you never got what you think you should have received as a young boy, the difference between then and now is that when you were a young boy, even if there was a man in your life, you didn't get to decide what that training looked like. He was going to treat you how he was going to treat you. He was going to introduce you to the things he was going to introduce you to. For the most part, you had very little control over that.
Yeah.
But as a man, you have complete control over what you learn and apply in your life. So when you were a boy, you didn't get to decide about all of the factors that were infused into your mind as an impressionable kid. But now if you're like, you know what? I think a man is somebody who's physically fit. Awesome. What does that mean to you? Does that mean that you're, muscles out to here and you're a bodybuilder? Or does that mean you're lean and shredded because you're a marathon runner? Or that you're fit enough that you can really train martial arts and do really well with that? You actually get to choose your own adventure. You remember those books?
Yeah.
Where you'd read the book and you'd read like two or three pages and you come to the fork in the road and it's like, if you want to go down the scary dark path, jump to page 7. If you want to go on the rocky steep path, jump to page 9. That's the beauty of being a man and trying to figure this stuff out. You get to decide what path do you want to run on. So if it's a business path or a financial path, real estate, stock market investing, just learning how to budget, buying into businesses, starting a business, you can decide fully what you want to do. And then once you start deciding, and we use tools, to help you decide, visions, tactics, objectives. There's things like that we've talked at length about. But once you decide, then the first thing you have to do is find somebody who's doing that and start doing what they do. I was having a good conversation with Sean Villalobos and just downstairs in the kitchen here a minute ago because I'm at his place. And he was saying with some of his guys, they'll come in and they've got access to world-class training from world-class trainers that every single one of us listening to this podcast would recognize. And they still don't do what the guy tells them to do. This guy will train them, he'll teach them, he'll say, do this, use this verbiage, here's how you do it. And they're like, nah. That's the problem with men is like you have access to these people and it's going to cost you nothing if you listen to a podcast, or $20 if you want to buy their book, or $1,000 if you want to go to their conference. Like you have unlimited access to these people. And even if you go, you still won't do what they do because you're making up all these excuses in your head. So yeah, figure out what you want, find people who are doing it, invest in them, invest in being around them, and actually apply what they're teaching you.
Got it. All right. Tadeus Horok. What should a young man do in order to be ready for a godly relationship? And do you think he's godly relationship, like establishing a relationship with God? Or is he talking about a relationship, like a romantic relationship that's godly aligned?
I think a more spiritually based relationship is what he's saying.
Okay.
That's what I think. Okay, so a couple of things. Number one, I think you ought to know your beliefs.
Yeah.
And I'm probably not the best person to talk about on this because we all have questions, right? We all question and we all wonder and think about these things, I think. But if you have this vision of what you want this godly, spiritually based romantic relationship to be, I think that's what he's going for, then you have to know what you believe.
Yeah.
Because you can't lead people, and you want to lead your woman.
Yeah.
You can't lead her if you don't know where you're going.
Yeah.
And she's going to see right through that. She's not going to follow you. She may be with you. I'm not saying that, but she's definitely not going to follow you down this spiritual path if you're like, I don't really know what this looks like.
Yeah.
And how do you get to know God? The same answer I gave you a minute ago about getting around people who know what they're doing. You got to get around God. You have to go to church. You have to be around spiritual men. You have to read the scriptures. You have to pray. And I know these are what we'd call in the LDS faith the primary answers.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that what we call them?
Yeah. Kind of
pray, read the scriptures. It's the easy stuff.
The child answers.
Yes.
Yeah.
The childlike answers. But that's what it is. It's like, how do you get strong? Or how do you get fit? Well, you eat better and you move more. Oh, that's a cop-out. No, it's not a cop-out because that's the exact right answer.
Yeah.
It just feels like a cop-out because it's so simple that we often overlook it and think it's got to be more complex.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just have to put yourself in proximity to the kind of person you want to be, the kind of information that person would consume. And then once you know where you're going, then you can't settle. That's another thing guys will do. Is they'll get into a relationship, whether it's a godly type relationship or they have some sort of vision about family planning or where they want to live or what their life looks like, but they'll sacrifice all of it because they love the woman. But I love her. I don't doubt it. I don't doubt that you love her. But that's not the only factor that goes into this long-term relationship. There has to be alignment there's lots of women to love. And you need to find one who actually is aligned with this godly vision of a relationship that you have. Because if you don't have that, whatever you've planned for doesn't really matter. She's not interested. She'll never follow you there.
Well, and some guys will even find the alignment of the relationship and then they'll fall off the wagon around their spirituality. They'll stop going to church after. Yeah. It's like, and then what good was that? That alignment was so critical, but then now you're no longer consistent in making that a priority in your life. So make sure not to lose that either.
I know you do a lot of hiring and consulting with hiring and bringing the right people and cultural development and things like that. I imagine, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that when you're looking to bring somebody into the organization, you're looking for a set of skills they already possess.
Absolutely.
And maybe even some experience in the realm of what you guys are dealing with.
Yeah.
And if they don't have experience and a certain set of skill set coming into it, you're just not going to hire them.
Yeah. And to be clear, and if we did hire them, it would be unfair because now we have them in a seat of the bus where they're not going to be successful. Mm-hmm. And that is not fair for anybody to have some expectations set on them that they're not capable of winning.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and the reason I bring that up, and you're dead on with that, because sometimes we just look at it from our own vantage point, but it makes sense to cut people loose so they can find what they really need and desire.
Yeah.
So it's actually selfless in a lot of ways too. But the reason I bring it up is and this is going to be a funny example, but if we're talking about a godly relationship, I think the last thing you ought to do is jump on Tinder and try to get into some hookup culture on Tinder. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying it can't happen because I'm sure there's guys who listen to this podcast who have found their wife and they've been married for a long time and they're happy and they go to church and they have a beautiful family. I'm not saying that. But the likelihood of finding that type of person is going to be greatly diminished relative to going to the local church. Maybe there's single adult activities with the congregation that you're part of. Like there's things that you can do where you're more likely to put yourself in proximity to a woman who already shares all the values that you have. Yeah. And then you don't need to make it any harder. Relationships are hard, even when things are perfect. Imagine how difficult they are when there's a mismanagement or misalignment of values.
Well, and we'll lie to ourselves, right? Guys will find that girl and go, oh, yeah, she's amazing. That religion thing's really important to me. We'll get there, right? And then they'll have this covert contract how they're going to, expect her to change and become something that she's not, which will just end up coming with a bunch of animosity and resentment.
You know where I think that stems from, Kipp? First and foremost, it stems from a lack of options. It's a scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
Right? If there's only one woman you've ever dated your entire life and you felt like that's the only woman you could ever get, then you're going to do everything you can, including sacrifice yourself, in order to stay with her.
Yeah.
But if, on the other hand, you have plenty of options, like you're an attractive man, you're a good catch, you've got a variety of women that you could potentially start relationships with, you're less likely to sacrifice your own values because you can select the partner who's going to align with you and move forward in the way you want to move forward. And the best way to do that is to make yourself into the kind of man that would attract that kind of woman.
Yeah.
And you do that by keeping commitments to yourself, by getting strong, by being this spiritual man, living the spiritual journey, doing what those spiritual men do, by making money, which is just a metric of providing value to other people. There is so much that you can do where that kind of woman, it will almost seem magnetic. She will be attracted to you.
And you'll have the confidence.
Where you can say no.
Yeah.
That's true confidence. Confidence is, if you want to know if they're really confident, do they have the ability to say no?
Yeah.
Because if they don't have the ability to say no, then it's not confidence, it's something else. But a man that can say no is a man who's confident.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Like if he says no to a potential job opportunity, well, he's confident because he's got another job lined up and he could pass up on this pretty cool job that a lot of other guys would kill to have. So the ability to say no is actually a really powerful litmus test for the level of confidence you have.
Yeah. So hop on Tinder and then just say no a bunch of times.
Just say no. Just get really good at it. Swipe right or left or whatever it is on that app. I don't know.
Nope. Yeah. All right.
Oh boy, probably ought to do that anyways. But,
yeah. Randy Norville, how do you find new goals or passions? I've achieved a fair bit by 35 and I'm struggling not to coast through life on Copilot.
Well, one thing I would say is you could take your new or your current passions and hobbies and interests and just take them to the nth degree.
Yeah.
I think about jiu-jitsu. It's like, somebody who's been training for 4 or 5 years, maybe they're a blue belt, maybe getting into that purple belt realm. I mean, by all objective standards, you could say, hey, they've done pretty well relative to every other man out there. So maybe you don't need to find something new. Maybe you're like, hey, now I really want to learn this or this defense or this offense and achieve this rank. So you can take your current thing to the nth degree. I would say that. I would also look for ancillary things. So again, to go back to the jiu-jitsu thing, let's say you love jiu-jitsu, but you're kind of like, I like it well enough. It's good. It adds value to my life, but I'm getting a little tired. Maybe I want to try something else. Well, go to the Muay Thai class after the jiu-jitsu class. Or take up some striking, some boxing, or some kickboxing, or some grappling, wrestling. It's something new. This is actually something I need to do because I lose interest. It's that bright, shiny object syndrome. And I tend to do it in the business, but one thing I've learned in the business is you don't go so far out of the realm of what you're doing that it just distracts. But it's ancillary. It's part of what you're doing. And you're still in the same mission. You're still driving down the same highway. You're just in a different lane than you were before. And so I like finding those complementary hobbies because you already know it. You already know what value you get from it. And this is going to spice things up and keep it interesting for you.
Yeah. Randy's probably like goals and passions and maybe he's not looking for as serious of a question, but I'll go that direction, Randy. It's like, what are you about? Like, in the end, in the grand scheme of things, I think there's an echelon of fulfillment and purpose in life that is only made possible through creating a positive impact in others. So, I got my kids dialed in. Okay, great. How about your community? How about your state? What problem in the world are you taking on? I love the language. Someone's told me this. Everyone has problems. People that have a great amount of fulfillment in life chose their problem. So pick a problem. Pick homelessness or whatever and address it. Deal with it. And if there's problems in the home, broken relationships with siblings or things incomplete with parents, then that's probably the area that you need to address first. But regardless, right? Be about something. And what I'm saying is be about something that serves others.
Yeah. Well said.
All right. Couple more questions. Caleb Johnson. I'm not sure how you keep the podcast gig going. A lot of questions I see here, I can think of, I have already been answered on this podcast or by others. What do you do when you've addressed it all in one way or another? I guess that the question in my career field, I've mentored many people. One thing I've learned is that we all have the same problems, just with a different backstory.
Yeah. Well, I will say this. I don't like the phrase podcast gig, but I might be taking that personally. It has a little bit of negative connotation to it, but I don't think he actually means it like that. It's just when I hear that, because enough people do say that. They're like, oh, your little podcast thing. And I don't think he's doing that, but enough people do it where I'm like, it's just a little bit of ignorance around what I actually do. Again, that's not a indictment on what's his name?
Sorry, I moved on. Caleb.
Yeah, it's not an indictment on Caleb because I don't think he's doing that, but I hear that a lot. So how do I keep it going? Well, number one, to go back to what you just said, Kipp, purpose and mission. What's the alternative? Like, I literally have no other alternative. Not only because I'm too dumb to do anything else, but because I can't envision doing anything else. What would keep me this engaged and enthusiastic? What problem would I be solving that's greater than this one? And as I say that, all of you guys are thinking, well, this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem. Yeah, those are your problems to solve. Yeah. Those are not my problems to solve because you're the one fired up by it. But the other thing I realize is that, we do repeat things a lot. There's probably 10 to 12 types of questions that we get, and we've got them every week for a year. But that's okay because I know that two things. Number one is new people are coming to this movement all the time. So I could share the exact same message I shared last week, and this week it would land and resonate with new people who've never heard this before. And also, what resonates with you, Caleb, might not resonate with Joe. So I might say something that maybe Jocko Willink says, or David Goggins says, or any one of these guys, Jordan Peterson says. But for whatever reason, when I say it, it lands better with certain people, and when they say it, it lands better with others. So I know I'm going to hit a different demographic and group of people that other people are just because we all resonate with different people. And the third thing I know is that it takes men an unnecessarily large amount of times to hear something before they actually do anything about it. Yeah. Like, how many times have you jumped on the scale and said to yourself, I need to lose weight. I need to get that gym membership. I need to eat better. I need to ask for that promotion. I need to have that difficult conversation with my wife. I need to start that hobby. I need to launch that business. I need to write that book. How many times? Dozens, hundreds, thousands of times. But then something happens. Maybe it's a little kink in the relationship. Maybe it's a little health scare. Maybe it's a financial issue and burden that you're strapped with. And for whatever reason, in that moment, you just needed to hear it 101 times. And that 101st time you heard it was like, yep. And then you start taking action. And those are the messages we get. Yeah. Man, I've known I need to do this forever. And Ryan, you said this thing on this podcast, or you had this guest, or you did this thing, or you had this event. And for whatever reason, it just resonated with me. And I decided to do it. And that's how we keep going.
Yeah. And I don't think we're the same. I think our answers have kind of evolved.
True. Good point.
I'm sure.
I would hope.
Yeah. I'm sure if we look back 2 years ago, there's some things that were saying where I'm like, ugh, cringe. Like, do not listen to that guy.
Delete episode.
Yeah, for sure.
I have gone back and listened to some of the first episodes, and I have my first video on YouTube for Order Man I ever did, and I don't watch them because I see them and I'm like, oh. But they're good reminders. I don't know who it was on Instagram, said, you should look at your previous self and cringe at times. And if you don't, then you're not growing.
For sure. All right, Jacob Pinion. I was recently told that God won't use me because I have a heart at war. I know this was something that you have discussed a few separate times, but I can riff of what is heart of war means. Can I be a student of self-defense, jiu-jitsu, firearms, situational awareness without having a heart posture that is heart of war? If having a heart at war is inherently wrong, what should you suggest I do to reposition? And he shares that this was actually shared with him from a church leader's wife, saying all of his focus, he should be more like Christ and be meek and mild.
Well, so I actually answered this question a week or two ago. I think I did it when you weren't here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But no, you're good. And I'll tell you why, because when I answered it, he addressed you, but you weren't on the call. So I'm like, well, I'll go ahead and answer it. And then I must not have answered it to his liking. And so he really wants to hear from you, Kipp. So I'm going to bow out on this question. If you want to hear my answer, go back a week or two. Okay. But he really wants to hear from you. So I would love for him to be able to hear from you about it.
Okay. So this distinction comes from a book called The Anatomy of Peace. Anyone that knows of Harbinger Institute, they wrote a book called The Outward Mindset, Leadership and Deception. And this concept of heart at war is when, to be frank, you are shrouded in your lack of integrity so much that you are blaming and shaming and seeing other people as the problem. And we do that, by the way, so we can be justified in our way of being out of integrity, which is crazy. So if I'm not doing what I should be doing, most people will immediately go, it's because, Ryan's not doing this, or it's because of Ryan, and it's because of the government, it's because of my wife. And that's the excuse for me to be able to live with myself. Now, I love the term heart at war because I immediately know what that feels like. And for me, it's something not being complete with another individual. That's a heart at war. And most acts of war like this are of the cold variety. It's me not calling when I should. It's me withholding information. It's me stonewalling. It's me hoping they will fail because it will make me feel good. Those are acts of heart of war. Now, the pastor's wife here, right? She's thinking like war, like physical violence. And if you're focused on physical violence, then obviously, you're out of alignment with Christ. And so your question's rooted in her definition being drastically different, to be frank, than mine. And so in the spirit of the question, can you be doing jiu-jitsu, firearms, and situational awareness and not have contention and like evil in your heart? And the answer to that is absolutely. In fact, not only absolutely, I would argue that if you have a kid that has anger issues, have him do jiu-jitsu. Have him deal with being frustrated, feeling anger, dealing with being afraid. And what will happen is he will learn how to control those emotions and be less violent in life. Those things allow you to be calm and to understand where those emotions are coming from and then determine if you're going to act upon them.
You said it way more graciously than I did, so that's a way better answer. I just said, stop listening to her. She's wrong. No. When you were talking about jiu-jitsu, I was thinking, why? Well, same with firearms and self-defense and situational awareness. Okay, let's take firearms. Why would you train firearms? Is it to murder people? No, because murderers don't go to firearms training. They just shoot people. So why do you go to firearms training? To serve people, to protect the weak and vulnerable and those you love. So if anything, is it a heart at war, or is it actually out of service and love to another person? Same thing with jiu-jitsu. Part of it is love yourself enough to train and feel good about who you are. And so there's some self-respect that comes along with it. But you're doing it to be more valuable to the people in your life. How is that a heart of war? You're actually serving.
Totally. Well, and not only that, but what will happen? You take a tough situation, people do one of two things: fight or flight. And in most cases, they don't logically choose. They just act. So what's better? To leave it to chance if I go into fight mode, or to have proper training so I can regulate those emotions and choose to fight when appropriate and choose to flight when appropriate. Mm-hmm. And most people, they're too reactionary. They're not controlling their emotions, and these sayings help you. Yeah.
We had a guy on, and he's become a friend over the years, but his name's Kyle Carpenter. He was the youngest living Medal of Honor recipient as a Marine, and essentially his story is amazing. Jumped on a grenade. A grenade was thrown into his observation post. It was him and one other guy up there, a fellow Marine, and he jumped on this grenade, and it killed him. And he was brought back to life. But he woke up. He shares the story where he woke up, and he thought his buddies, his Marines, were playing a joke on him by pouring warm water on him. And then he realized, oh, that's not warm water. That's my blood leaving my body. And he died. I can't remember if he died once or 3 times, life flighted and all this stuff. And, this is a Marine. He's a warrior by definition. He is to protect. He is to inflict damage on the enemy. Like that's a very literal sense of the term war, right?
Yeah.
And yet his act, I'm not even get emotional when I say this. His act was not at war. There was no, as your definition is, there was no conflict there.
Yeah.
He did it out of love to his fellow Marines. It's really just how you frame it. And I like how you said, it's like, she might just be using a different definition. So maybe there's a conversation that requires some understanding there.
Yeah. Well, and then
it's way more gracious than I provided.
Yeah. And then you can debate with her on whether Christ went into temples and threw all their tables and yelled at people in violent ways or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point.
Not so mild and meek all the time. Now, is he?
Well, and that's actually a really interesting way. I know we use that example all the time when it comes to these types of things, but the other side of it too is Christ was contentious with people. Not out of a war, it wasn't the war mentality.
Out of service.
It was not a heart of war because he was in integrity. Yeah. Beliefs, actions. And so principles, and you either uphold and honor those principles or you don't. But he never shied away from saying, oh, that's okay, or that behavior is excusable. Now, he would say love everybody, but certainly we're not required or even desired to love the sin.
Yeah. We're
compelled not to love the sin, to be repulsed by it.
Yep.
So that's not the heart of war. Like you're talking more about integrity, and that's the real question.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
We'll wrap up with Eric Kovach. How long into and I love this question in so many ways, how long into your respective BJJ journeys was it before you didn't feel like you were a complete terrible at it? I've been training a little over a year. I've earned my first stripe a month or 2 ago, but I still feel like I completely suck when it comes to rolling, even with newer students.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually really good at jiu-jitsu. So about 6 months, I realized I'm really good at this.
You're like, I'm awesome.
And I'm done. So I stopped going and I'm done. I'm like, I don't need to learn anything else. No, of course the answer is you always feel. Well, it's actually all relative. I would imagine, Kipp, this is how I feel. I'm not gonna put words in your mouth. This is how I feel. When I roll with somebody and I get the better of them because I'm better at it, I think, man, I'm pretty good at this.
Yeah.
And then I roll with you and I'm like, man, I'm pretty horrible at this. It's all just relative. So you're definitely further down the path being a year into it than somebody who's a month into it. And you're definitely not as far down the path as somebody who's been doing it 10 years. So it's all just relative. And I think the answer is don't worry about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just keep going, keep training, keep learning, keep improving. The catch with this, though, this has hit me hard, is that when you train with people, everybody's progressing at the same level. So you feel like you're never learning. You're like, dude, those guys who were besting me last year are still besting me. Right. Because they're learning all the same stuff. Go train at a different school or go to a competition and you'll actually start to see there's a real disparity between you and other people.
Totally. Jiu-Jitsu is the sport for people that have dealt with or have figured out how to deal with sucking.
Yeah.
Like, what, 16 years in, dude, I still feel how you feel a lot of the time. But that's the power of it. I've learned to deal with it. That's why this game forces us to have huge amount of humility, which is beautiful. And what's so cool about it is humility gets forced into you and you're more skilled, but yet you're still so humble. That is powerful.
That's a good point.
That is really powerful. And so to Ryan's advice, it's okay.
Yeah.
Like, accept the fact that someone's always going to be able to submit you, that many times you won't feel like you're getting any better, but you are. And be with that. And that's okay.
There is one practical bit of advice I'd give to you. When you're not having a good day at training wise,
yeah,
I think it's actually important to dissect that. Why? Are you tired? Are you stressed? Are you malnourished? Are you overnourished? Like there's a lot of things that it could be. And if you start to dissect and find trends between the days that you feel like garbage and the days that you actually do pretty well, you might be able to amplify your results because you show up. Kipp, you've talked about this. You show up in a more powerful way, which obviously translates to a more effective training session.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. And as you say that, I immediately went to also the interpretation, right? Like sometimes part of me feels like, well, keep it playful. Like go train and be like, have fun. And when I think about it, it's like, what stops me from having fun? It's the expectations that, well, I should be way better than this. And it's because I'm bringing my ego to the table and I'm not there to learn. I'm there to see where I sit on the totem pole of greatness. And I'm like, I need to let go of that. That's also some of the problem too, because that will hinder your growth, by the way. Because if you don't learn to let go of the expectation of being great at this, then you won't try new moves. And every training will be a comp for you because you're trying to validate that you're great and you'll stun your own growth. So do your best, but also be okay in learning and getting that learning is in that space of not winning.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough. Cool.
All right, guys. Well, I've got a jet because I've got a meeting, an Iron Council meetup that we're doing here in Nashville. So if you want to be part of those meetups and you want to be part of something big and you want to be involved with Kipp, you and me and thousands of other guys who are part of this organization, but it's that relationship of not just, hey, let me show you some books and fill out some assignments each month, but hey, it sounds like something's going wrong. Let me call you. Or, hey, you said you would do this and you didn't do it, so I need you to tell me why. You're going to be accountable to me and to you also. But it's deeper than that, and I think that's why it's so powerful. Over the past 10 years, there's been a lot of other little organizations similar to ours that have popped up, which is great. And I've always been a huge advocate for that. But at the risk of sounding a little bit arrogant with what we're doing is they're always behind because they don't really get the depth of what we're doing. They think it's about the assignments. They think it's about the attendance. They think it's about the numbers. They think it's about fill in the blank with whatever metric they're looking at. And I don't think of it like that. Now, we use metrics to evaluate growth.
Yeah.
But to me, it's about the connections. To me, it's about the guy who had a gun in his mouth, and because he had two guys in the Iron Council call him, he decided to take the gun out of his mouth, put it down, and start fixing his shit. It's the guy who is more connected and romantic and intimate with his wife because he's decided to lose weight and get in shape and feel good about himself so he can show up more fully for her. It's about the guy who had this like amazing dream of starting this business, and he's been thinking about it for a decade, but he's been scared and he doesn't have any resources. And finally somebody says, I'll help you, or I'll hold you accountable. And so he takes one small step and he goes and gets that business license. And then that turns into $10,000 of revenue. And then that turns into 6 figures. And then he retires from his other company and he decides to take his family on the vacation that he never could do before. And now he has a connected memory with his family that hasn't been available. The metrics are important because they measure something real and tangible. But it's the non-tangibles that most of these organizations don't understand. And I think that's where the value is that we provide. So, like you said, Kipp, we're going to open up later this week, the 15th of September. Go to orderaman.com/Iron Council and be part of this thing with us.
Awesome.
All right, brother. Appreciate you, Kipp. Guys, appreciate you. Great questions today. We'll keep answering those questions. You keep asking them. Hope you go out there, take action, and become the man you are meant to be.